army.
It is. It's sold well. The French have sold very well.
Yeah.
Quite versatile army.
With respect to your new digital app, is there any plans to make singular squads stats rather than just an army list?
I haven't got a clue to the answer to that.
But we know who will.
Yeah, Alessio.
Alessio. Right.
Grab Alessio when he comes in. He's the tall one.
What release in the next 12 months are you most excited for?
Conflict 47. It's going to be bloody awesome. Andy Chambers, as we know, is a fantastic writer, and we're giving him a lot of rope, so to speak, to make it fairly crazy. Yeah, Conflict. I think then you
Rick, do you want to
speak up.
Sorry, Rick, would you like to move Warlords of Erewhon to Epic?
Warlords of Erewhon?
Yeah.
Yeah, just in case anyone doesn't know, Warlords of Erewhon is a kind of little side project that I strong-armed Warlord into publishing. And it uses the bolt action system, but for a skirmish fantasy war game, or a warband game, really. To be honest, Warlord just did that as a favour. I don't think Warlord are at all interested in doing fantasy. I think that was something which got beaten out of us over 20, 30 years at Games Workshop, wasn't it? So it was kind of like an indulgence, and I created a game and a book that I thought would stand alone. I've added a website for anyone's interested, which got more army lists on it. And it's a sort of a, here's an idea, here's some rules, here's ways you can change it, here's a points value system, in fact. Have fun with it, and then kind of, that's it. There's no real support for it. In terms
Epic
of
fantasy would be nice. You know, I think people.
Well, I'm up for it, John. If you, I can't see it myself, but yes, it could be. I mean, Epic fantasy is Warmaster.
Yeah.
And actually,
what you did.
Yeah. And rather than Warlords of Erewhon, if I was to do that again, I would go Hail Caesar. In fact, I started writing a Hail Caesar fantasy game at one point. Had a word with the powers that be at Warlord. Looked at me and said, "Oh yeah, that'd be great. We'll put that at the bottom of the pile, even below John's."
The old four-sided trick.
The old four-sided trick. So I thought, what's the point? You know, there's no, you can't maintain, as a games writer, as a designer, you can't maintain enthusiasm in the face of a 3-year time schedule. It doesn't work. So I gave up in the end. I thought, well, maybe one day I'll do something with it. And when I came to doing Warlords of Erewhon, I actually used a lot of the magic system that I developed for Hail Caesar, or Hail Frodo as I was going to call it. I should get away with that. So there was an element of crossover there, and actually, you know, it's piss easy. It's just a stat exercise, really. There's
You're not allowed to say it's easy.
it's just a stat exercise. I mean, and then got to crunching. You know, lots of tedious writing stats, writing the army list, making sure everything's reasonably in whack, you know, all that. That's not piss easy, but the actual conceptually, it would be simple. Anyone could do that.
Yeah, anybody. Right, gentlemen there.
Yeah. How have you found the rollout of Acton Panzer? Do you have any more plans for it?
We do. Roger Gerrish, who is also in today, who's him and his Mike is the other writer, the two writers. Roger's in. He's just put in asked to do a supplement for it, and its working title is Iron Coffins, which gives you a clue that it's probably Western Desert. So we can include all the Italian stuff, all the dreadful British tanks, and it will also cover the Blitzkrieg as well. So some rubbish German tanks as well, and some deadly French tanks, which will make the Germans think about it for a change, and equivalent of a Char B coming down the road like a King Tiger in 1940. So
Shot C.
yes, that would be good. All those multi-turrets, we'll have to think of rules for that. So yeah, it's going to be early war, and it's also going to cover Japan. So we make about 350 armoured fighting vehicles, and the brief will be, let's see if we can get a card for every vehicle that we make. just for the lunatics who want to field whatever obscure Japanese vehicles they can think of making. Or so yeah, that's the next one. Midway next year. Who else have we got? Any other victims?
I'll have a go. I'll try and frame it as a question, partially more appreciation really. With the app coming, I'm going to sort of ask about sort of the philosophy going into designing what the sort of goals were for it. More, not to name anything else, but sort of really favourable sort of pricing structure in there and including all the rules and everything together built in rather than kind of blocking some away. What were your sort of design sort of thoughts when going into design?
I don't understand apps. What is it of which you speak? You have to grab Alessio again for that, because he's all over that sort of stuff, and we'll give you chapter and verse. But I wouldn't know what one was, but so I can't pretend otherwise. But Alessio will let you know if you grab him.
To both of you, please. I was just wondering, what have you found the hardest in your careers, but also what do you think you've got the best out of your careers, or maybe found the most pride in completing?
Oh, Rick, yours first.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I think the hardest thing was trying to steer Games Workshop from being a little product-driven company into a multinational company, and then a public limited company, and then a company that was driven by massive manufacturing considerations. You know, it's like we went from being 3 or 4 guys that turned up in the morning, poured some lead, put toy soldiers in boxes and sent it out, went home and went to the pub, got drunk, came back, did the same thing the next day. It was sort of like that, wasn't it?
Still is.
No, not to Warlord. And then by the time I left, you know, we were turning over hundreds of millions. The whole thing was balanced on a knife edge in terms of whether the manufacturing could cope or the sales could cope, and that one wrong decision about stock control and you'd bankrupt the company. And that was tough, actually, wasn't it? It was tough years, just because of the transition. But you were running to catch up all the time. And in terms of personal best, it's very hard not to say 40k, but of course 40k was a thing I came up with in the mid 80s. It was published in 87, and it immediately changed. It was so successful that everyone jumped on it. That's what happens with bandwagons. And immediately it became everybody's sandpit. Well, I designed it as a sandpit, so I should take some pride in that. But the sandpittery that went on wasn't necessarily anywhere within my original concept of it. So we just followed the money, and Brian Ansell contributed a lot, and his stuff was crazy. I thought, Brian, you don't understand how 40k works. Let me explain to you. This sublight invasion of the Tyranids that's going on, you realise how long this will take to reach the Imperium? About 1 million years, you know, that sort of thing. So I had to kind of ringmaster it to some extent. But people didn't care. It was all, the models were great. The models were inspired by the background was inspired by the models, and people bought into that. So in the end, although I take pride in 40k, I'm very aware that it wasn't anything I did that made it so great or so successful. I laid the foundations for it being successful, but ultimately it was everyone else that made it successful.
Well, somebody had to sell that rubbish.
Yes, somebody. And all the other rubbish, John. That was the best of it. So yeah, I'd say 40k, but you know, kind of not 40k. The game I'm most pleased with was Warmaster, because again, it turned out to be a little bit of a side project. By the time I did Warmaster, Games Workshop had moved on, so the concept didn't quite fit the period. It didn't fit the state the business was in, which means that ultimately we were in no position to sell it effectively or market it effectively. But nonetheless, I crowbarred it through after a fashion. It got published as a book. Originally it was going to be a box game with plastics, but it got published as a book, and then the models were metal. I had endless trials done in the factory to make sure they could make them. They said they could, they couldn't, and that gave us endless problems again. But the game itself, I'm most pleased with because it really changed the nature of what a war game could be. Guilty, a bit stronger, thank you. I think the concept of a war game before I did Warmaster was very much a turn is fixed, moves are fixed, people move in a fixed way, and then combat becomes the thing where you have your variety and champs. Well, with Warmaster, I just flipped that round so that the moves became more a question of try to do this, but you won't necessarily achieve it. The moves became random in a way they're not in a fixed war game, which meant in effect the I go, you go becomes slightly randomised because you don't always get to go. But the combats are quite predictable, or should be. The more dice you roll, the more predictable the result, and you do 10 rolls. And I saw that being picked up in other games afterwards as a concept. Quite significantly, and ultimately we went on to exploit that for Black Powder, because Black Powder's a development of Warmaster, and then Hail Caesar, and everything that's stemmed off those games, including Pike and Shot, which Steve Morgan wrote, and the new Epic games, of course. In fact, the irony is that the Epic game now uses figures that look exactly like the Warmaster figures. So the whole thing's gone full circle.
Why reinvent the wheel?
Right, yeah, exactly.
There it was all along.
That's his terrible thing to say, but I always said, have one good idea, do it properly. 2 ideas is a waste of an idea. And that is kind of where we got to with Warmaster.
I remember that one.
Yeah.
Did you say the thing the proudest of? Proudest was developing the Games Workshop retail chain. That was the greatest achievement from the Games Workshop because there was nobody to follow. All of Games Workshop, all their cleverness. If you want to buy Games Workshop, you've got to have £3.2 billion. That's their market worth. 3.2 billion. It's enormous, and their great success. Why I'm still so proud of Games Workshop is they've never followed anybody. They've never had anybody to follow. They've made it up as we go. So we were 21, 22-year-olds. We just made it all up as we went along. And Brian Ansell said, "You could open some stores." And I said, "I've never worked in a retail store in my life." So he said, "We'll just make it how you think it should be."
Wow.
So we kind of developed now. They'll now call it a destination activity something site is what they'll call them now. But we just thought it was a shop with toy soldiers where it'd be great if you could get a game, and that would be cool. And then put a painting table in as well. Well, that's a good idea. And people saying, "What blinding brilliance!" And we're thinking, how bleeding obvious.
You're a gentleman.
Stay another week. Yes, sir. So what we're in the end, we're just doing. Most of us would have got there in the end, but perhaps not. But I don't know how many Games Workshop stores there are now. 700, something like that. Anybody? But what they're doing, of course, every time, and they're great stores to go into still, but they're very good for recruiting for the tabletop hobby. They're great for us at Warlord. There's no doubt about it. Converting people into tabletop wargaming, that's great because a lot of them drift down to us in the end. And then the other thing, I suppose, was setting up Warlord and with Paul. And I'd always said to my old boss, I said, "Well, I always wanted to do historical gaming because I do enjoy fantasy wargaming, but historical is my thing." And Tom Kirby, my old boss, just said, "John," he said, "do you think I haven't looked at that?" So I said, "You probably have, haven't you?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "I've added up every single historical company's turnover that I can find in the world, 140 different companies, some of them literally one man and a dog, but they're sticking 50 grand for them, and he said, and it comes to 1.8 million. And I said, "Oh, right. That's not a great deal, is it, in the grand scale of things when workshops doing, I don't know, 100 million or whatever it would be at the time." But I said, "Yeah, but that's because nobody's doing it properly, isn't it? If I came to you 20 years ago and said, we're going to do a tabletop game with goblins and squig hoppers and things like that, you'd think I was bloody mad, wouldn't you?" Because it was mad, but it worked.
Remember, science fiction doesn't sell.
And another quote: science fiction doesn't sell.
That was the understanding in the early 80s.
Yeah. So anyway, I met my old boss 3 weeks ago in his island kingdom on the Isle of Man, and he did write me a very nice note when I went. He said, just for the record, I'm telling everybody I meet that you can make money out of historical miniatures.
Hey.
Signed Tom, which I thought was very noble of him. He didn't need to say that, so that was good. So that's I hope that answers that question.
Wonderful. Thank you.
What else have we got?